Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back after the break and the graduation ceremony. My name is Chris Hodge. I have the honour of being a member of Hawkamah's advisory board, and it's always a pleasure to participate in the annual conference. Hopefully next year it will be possible for us to meet in person once again. This panel is going to be looking at some of the many challenges and risks that the boards are having to face at the moment. And as Philip Armstrong said in his opening remarks, I think that the variety and sheer number of risks that companies are having to deal with at the moment is possibly unprecedented. It's a big subject. We only have an hour, so obviously we're only going to be able to scratch the surface of some of these issues. But fortunately, we have an excellent panel to share their experience and insights with you, and I'm sure that you and I will learn a great deal from them. You can see their full biographies on the conference platform, but briefly they are Robert Bush, President and CEO of Cajary Majlis, Emad Ghaly, who's the CEO of Siemens Energy in Egypt, Dr. Waddah Hashmi, Senior Director for Logistics and Marine Assurance at Enoc, and last but by no means least, Raji Hattar, who's the Chief Sustainability and Compliance Officer at Aramex. The format for the session is that we will have a discussion between the panelists for about 40 minutes, after which there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions or make comments. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them as you think of them. You don't need to save them up towards the end. There is a Q&A icon next to the chat icon on the platform. If you look to your right of your screens, please use those and the questions will be forwarded to me to answer the panel. The focus is going to be on three topics, broad topics where we've seen significant change in recent years. I don't think any of these were caused by the pandemic, but it has certainly brought them higher up board's agenda, and it's also accelerated the rate of change that we're seeing. And many of these changes are likely to be permanent ones. As Philip Armstrong and others on the previous panel have already said, things are not going to go back to the way they were when the pandemic is over. The three broad topics we're going to focus on, some of which have been touched on a bit by the previous panel. First is the business environment, things such as consumer behavior, supply chain disruption, geopolitical risk, and disruptive competitors. And that last one in particular then brings us on to our second topic, which is technological change, issues like digitalization, cybersecurity, and new business models. The third broad topic we'll look at, again, and this is something that's already been touched on, is workforce and talent management, the impact of things like remote working and outsourcing, and some of the changing expectations of employees. I think if you bring those three broad topics together, what you're seeing in some cases are new companies with entirely new business models, and even for traditional companies, for want of a better word, significant and permanent changes in the way in which they operate. And this begs the question of whether our traditional governance arrangements, which are always based around an assumption that you have a single hierarchical organization with the board at the top, whether those assumptions are still correct and whether the system we've designed is still fit for purpose. And we'll try to spend a little bit of time on that as well. That's it from me by way of introduction. We'll now turn to the panel and to pick up the first of the topics I mentioned, start by asking which changes in the broad business environment had the biggest impact on their companies and how their boards are trying to address these topics. Raji, I imagine for a company like Aramex, you're having a great deal of significant disruption to your operations over the last 18 months or so, and also perhaps increased competition from one source or another. Would you like to start us off and talk about some of the things that your board is having to deal with in this area?
Yes, Chris, thank you, and thanks for Hawkamah and DFM for the opportunity. Actually, the pandemic just revealed what kind of risks that nobody was looking for before. The first thing was the disruption of the logistics industry in total by all airports were closed, ports were closed, people were not allowed to move. So this have put a great pressure on all logistics players across the globe how to move and to start adapting to what happened. And this imposed on the logistics industry to change the way they are thinking and they are moving their operations from especially within the countries themselves, because the priority was for food, was for vaccines, medicine, rather than shopping, online shopping. On the other side, the online shopping increased drastically, especially domestic online shopping, because people who used to go to a supermarket now they are just ordering their stuff from the supermarket. And the resources that the logistics industry had at that time was way minimal. So what happened is basically you need to start looking at creative solutions to be able to deliver One of the things that we did in Aramex, we created a business model. We call it fleet. Fleet is something similar to the taxi applications or to the Ubers, whereby if you have a car, you can just log in and say, yes, I can deliver, irrespective of who you are. We do a background check on you, and you can just come and start delivering shipments all over. This drove us to partner with Dubai Taxi, for example, in Dubai, to deliver grocery, where our fleet was overrun with other types of deliveries. On the other side, and not to take it too long, this also imposed a different type of competition. Initially, our competitors are, the big players in logistics, the airlines, the sea lines. Suddenly, 2-3 young people sitting in a room with a mobile, writing an application, and they launch it, and suddenly they are competing with us on domestic deliveries. So this also imposed different challenge on us, whereby your typical competitor is not there anymore. The technology advancement is driving the competition now. So this also puts a great pressure on the company internal and the board itself when it comes to decision making, shifting of revenue streams, shifting of competition, the higher reliance on technology. And if you are not on top of everything when it comes to technology, then you'll just be lost. So that's in a nutshell what we are facing.
Thanks, Raji. I mean, the changing competition you mentioned, which I imagine will be a bit of a recurring theme in this session, it sounds like you are responding to that in a number of ways, including by partnering with some of them. But presumably, for you, if you were going to be changing your business model fundamentally, that's not something you can do overnight. That's a sort of medium to long-term strategy. So are you putting plans in place to deal with that, or?
Well, actually, before the pandemic, we were starting our digital transformation for all our operations. So for us, that was, it was not a reactive action, but basically continuation of the transformation of the company into the future, and adapting technology in all aspects of the business. So that was, that gave us actually a test on what we were trying to do, even if the pandemic was not coming. So yeah, this is the plan: is that to continue on, digitizing all the processes, including the interaction with our suppliers, our clients, moving everything into the cloud, and implementing the highest trends of technology.
Thanks, but it's as planned, but probably at an accelerated pace given the challenges you're thrown up to. Emad, would you like to touch on either on the same issues or some of the other aspects of the business environment, consumer behaviour, geopolitical risks, any of these things that are particularly affecting Siemens?
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. So briefly, we are more into the business B2B. It's not business to consumer. So basically, our customers are typically government organizations or large utilities or large private customers. So the challenges we faced during the pandemic, because we cared about protecting our employees. So, and we had the people which need to go to the sites to do the job, execute projects. So for us, that was a challenge, how to manage this balance between protecting the employees and executing our project and meeting the requirement towards our customer. So that was the first challenge. Second challenge, of course, all the travel restrictions which we were all facing. We for example, we used to do factory acceptance tests, taking customer to our factories and so on and so forth, which we couldn't do. So, but we as Siemens Energy, we had already a big investment or a good investment on the digitalization and the IT. So using latest technology like virtual reality and other type of technologies that we have used in order to overcome these obstacles. So instead of traveling for factory acceptance tests for our equipment, we invited our customer in a certain setup, and we showed them this type of acceptance at the factories. We also we have remote support from our expats in around the world, which they couldn't fly. So we have deployed a certain type of equipment where the expat can see inside, for example, a power plant, and then our local expats can execute jointly the job. So yes, the problem and the constraint enabled us to come up with innovative ideas and solutions in order to really we keep the business running, and we keep the light on for our customers and in the areas where we operate. You are muted.
Terrible for the moderator to forget to unmute himself is unforgivable. I do apologize. So I mean, you mentioned some of the disruption in terms of the business model. Obviously, the sector that you're in is one that's facing some significant challenges, related to some of the sustainability issues we all talked about. Is that something that, no doubt you already had long-term plans to deal with that? Is that something where the pandemic has highlighted issues or emphasized to you the need to perhaps bring some of those plans forward?
Again, we had and we have and we are continuing expanding and investment in digitalization and in IT at large, because we were living the pace of digitalization and how fast it was moving. Of course, the pandemic made it much more faster, but thanks God we were ready with our technology and our also people, because the most important part in bringing this solution that your people are ready, because you can have such a fancy equipment and fancy solutions, but if your people are not ready how to use this type of equipment or how to overcome certain challenges using this type of technology, then you won't be able to make it. So we were ready with the investment, with the equipment, and also with our people. We started to train them on digitalization already 4 or 5 years ago, because we have foreseen that digitalization is coming, the challenges are coming. We didn't, of course, foresee any pandemic, but we have foreseen that yes, we have to bring our people up with us in order to be able to compete in the new digital world.
Thanks very much. I think we'll come back again to digitalization in a little while, but I'd like to get some initial thoughts from Robert and then Dr. Waddah, if I may, on this first question about the business environment in general. What's the impact been over the last 18 months, and in terms of some of the sort of longer term trends on your company?
Great, Chris. I'll address that a little bit. So we started 2 companies during COVID, and we would not have been able to, certainly not in the same way, but for the fact that there was there was a crisis going on. There were all of these challenges, some of which were mentioned both by Emad and Raji. And so what we found was that many people that it would have been challenging for us to get access to actually had more time on a net basis, because they were open to suggestions. They were it caused a global rethink of what are we doing, why are we doing it? And that was a great opportunity for me and my team to swoop in there with some potential ideas or new ideas or different way of thinking, because everyone was sort of looking to determine should they reset or not. The second benefit that we got out of it was when you're having to work from home, and this may not be good to hear for some of the larger players that had remote working, but everyone started thinking about their side hustle. I had from CEOs to board members to mid-level people that are not they weren't traveling as much. They were trying to figure out whether they wanted to stay where they were. And so we picked up some very qualified consultants and advisors who were not ready to make the change for some of the things that we wanted, but frankly said, you know what, just like we're trying to create resiliency in the business, perhaps I should have a little bit more optionality in my career. So we got some very fine people that joined some of our causes with I call it their side hustle. I said, listen, stay where you are. It looks like things are going to work and turn and you've got that going on, but join us, give us an hour a week or whatever. And we're doing some things that are really innovative. And then thirdly, when you're building a business in the middle of a crisis, it becomes part of your DNA to think about shocks, to think about resiliency. It's no longer theoretical. If you don't do these things, you won't make it the next couple of months, which is obviously part of the challenge that all startups have. So it was, those three things existed. It was exceptionally difficult. It was exceptionally painful, but because of when we started getting access to resources, getting access to people, and building these redundancies day one, we are now fortunate and believe that we are better, stronger, more nimble business as a result.
No, thanks. That's a really interesting example, because the other panelists are obviously with more established long-term and much larger businesses, and I think the example you've given is that one company's risk is another company's opportunity, and that for new entrants to the market and so on, there are obvious things that you're not burdened with, either costs or resources or history. You're able to sort of enter in a new style, and that's how the larger organisations, the more established companies that respond to that challenge, I think, is one of the big issues really at the moment. In terms of what you call the side hustle, that's something I'd like to come back to a little later. And one of the topics we want to talk about generally is the whole nature of how the world of work has changed and what that means for individuals, but also for organisations trying to sort of oversee and manage that challenge. But before we get on to that, and we'll turn perhaps to Dr. Waddah with, again, this opening question: what are the particular issues around the business environment more generally that have been a challenge for Enoc, and how are you addressing them? And then, as we've already touched on digitalisation to some extent, perhaps you could then lead us into the second topic we want to talk about, which was the other aspects of technological change, things like cybersecurity, which was touched on before, and so on. And over to you. We have I'll let you address that. We've got a question coming already for you, but we'll let you make your opening remarks, because you may answer that question in doing so.
Yes, thank you very much, and pleasure being here on at the Hawkamah conference. I think, I mean, my colleagues have said quite a few things about change and about how change has really brought about well, maybe some success stories at corporate level, at small company level, and at the level of individuals. I think one thing that we really should question, I'll speak more generally about the energy sector and the supply chain and try to address the question as well. But in terms of a core business, many organizations started to ask themselves about their own core business. In the past, when you'd go and talk to various senior leadership boards, and would come up with some innovation with regards to, for example, changing the way that, as Raji explains, changing the way that you deliver things, through logistics, or changing the way that you deliver a service, or finding a different way of getting into another part of a business which is sort of in parallel or even in competition to what you're doing at the moment. One thing that comes to mind is really that many of these directors were sort of asking questions of, well, yeah, what is our core business again, and can we actually start exploring doing some other things? And I think, as Robert probably explained, it was this whole notion of when necessity is the mother of all invention kind of thing. That, okay, look, we have to sort of survive and all that. So they questioned less, I think, their core business and what would typically be under normal conditions, or say normal conditions as in pre-COVID conditions. That no, that's not really our core business, and we should really be spending time looking at that. But in terms of serious, significant things, and we already touched upon, and Emad's already spoken about digitization, etc. The real challenge of I think of the digitization has not been the technology. Yes, there's been some issues with technology. Well, I'm sure we're going to come on and talk about cybersecurity and the challenges of how companies had to really move all their workforce and secure that workforce, and really worry. And obviously, every organization had to take some compromises, and for maybe for certain amount of time, where actually had to be exposed because they needed to get people all online to sort of work together. But I think the most important challenge that we need to understand about the digitization, I think the boards need to understand also, is the challenge of the sort of the change management that comes with that as we move and transition into a different kind of world. Today, some companies here in the Middle East, many of them are sort of going back to sort of 100% workforce. There was a lot of discussion about only less than a year ago about hybrid's going to stay or working remotely is going to stay, and it seems that there's a lot of mixed messages, and a lot of organizations are looking at it differently. Some are saying, yeah, we should have a hybrid system. Some said no, we should come back to the office so we can sort of work together. And then probably I would assume that they're going to be looking at policies to see how they can get home working, because the sort of the home working it was sort of it's like what I think it was Martin Luther King who said, we never landed on Capitol Hill, or Capitol Hill landed on us. So this digitization sort of landed on us, and we had to sort of deal with it. So taking people with us through this process has been, I think, very, very important. So I think the companies have been successful who have been able to take the people with them. And what I mean by taking people with them is not using just digitization or using remote working because that was just the need of the hour, but actually looking at that and looking at the productivity issues, looking at, a lot of people tell me that people are a lot more productive because when they're online. And I ask why, and they say, well, they end up working longer hours. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're more productive just because they're working longer hours, so they're available more often because they were just sitting at home. I think that there's a massive impact, and because my background is in sort of health and safety, I think there's been a massive impact on people's well-being and their health and their work-life balance. And I think dealing with this new normal of having a hybrid world is a lot more stressful than it was before. Before we were flying around all the time, and then we had to juggle things. But today, we fly around wherever you fly around, and no matter where you are in the world, and there's a call or there's a conference and stuff like that. Robert's in Atlanta, Emad's in Egypt, Raji's in Jordan, Chris, I think you're in the UK, I'm here in Dubai. And we're all together here in this conference. So, there is a big impact of that. And I think it's important for boards to understand that that's going to have an impact, and the burnout rate on employees can be an issue. So I think the human element needs to be appreciated. I think a lot more moving forward by boards.
I'll take that as a prompt to move on to the broader topic of the workforce. I think we'll come back if we have time to cybersecurity, as Phil Armstrong said in his opening remark. The two are related, because you now have a much. You don't just need to worry about the integrity of the company's own systems. You've got many, many other opportunities for them to be infiltrated through remote working and so on. But the point you make about thinking about in general terms, the well-being of the employees was obviously something that was highlighted again by the pandemic, and the terminology we use is human capital management. But it's essentially, are you both utilizing to best effect the workforce you have, and are you ensuring that you're nurturing the talent and so on that you require, whether that be inside or outside the organization. And there's a number of issues, I say, both from an employee perspective. Robert touched on this, what he called the side hustle before, which benefits some, possibly doesn't benefit everybody, but also in terms of management and oversight from the board, issues like your ability to assess the quality of people you're recruiting to key positions if you're not having the opportunity to meet them, how you exercise oversight of the performance of a widely dispersed team, again, where you're not necessarily seeing firsthand what they're doing, how you integrate and create a corporate culture for a highly dispersed organization. All these sort of issues, and what the expectations of and career expectations of individuals are, and whether you can assume that you have if you get a good person, you have them for life in the way that you perhaps might have been able to assume in the past. Emad, would you like to comment on any of those issues? Is this something that you found a challenge?
Yes, thank you. Of course, it was a challenging situation, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we tried to hire new talents because we had restrictions, restrictions on face-to-face meetings. But nevertheless, I personally believed and implemented that it was a must to see the candidate at least one time before hiring, especially for critical functions, and to spend the time with him or with her, even in an open environment, at least to decrease the risk. But hiring a talent, especially critical function or important function, without seeing them, that for me was I can't do it, or I couldn't do it. So that was a must. And also when we face the same request, for example, when we start to hire talents at the lower part of the organization that they asked about, we need to come to the office. We need to see the environment where we are working maybe 2 days per week. So they had also issues or similar questions on their side. They wanted to see the environment. So it's from both sides. Yes, the people and companies accept the fact that, at least in our case at Siemens Energy, that we will work for the foreseeable future in hybrid mode. Nevertheless, there is a need that we see each other because we will interact. I need him I need him or her, as you have mentioned, to be part of our culture. So he needs to get the culture, and he will not get the culture only online. He will get the culture when they work together in a team. And also another lesson learned from our perspective, that we need to give people freedom to work where they want, because if there are 4 or 5 member in a team, and yes, they can come to the office, they can do whatever. They can work somewhere else if they need to cooperate together, either mix between online or face-to-face. So this freedom, I think, is also an option now. It's not an option now, but it's really a necessity, that we give freedom to our workforce to work from wherever, in order to ensure that they meet the target and of the business. So this freedom also came as a direct result from the pandemic impact. One last point, which you mentioned, concerning the how to ensure that the people are remaining more motivated, engaged about their future career, and also the point which has been mentioned by Dr. Waddah, the mental health. Mental health, of course, is a crucial issue, and we have recognized that, and we have implemented and still implementing, of course, a kind of a program where we talk together. We bring experts in this field, at least to support our employees, and even to support ourselves to overcome the stress coming from the pandemic and all the issues which have been created by this situation. So mental health is, of course, of utmost importance. The career and the talent development, yes, it is an issue, of course, but implementing specific programs. For example, what I personally did, that visited the different parts of the organization on every 2-3 weeks in a smaller setup, in an open air setup. But at least you get in contact with the people, you listen to them, you talk to them, while eliminating as much as possible the risks around the COVID. So we still need to get in contact with the people to assure them, and also to ensure that all the change management which we are going through, they also feel it and they see it happening, and to be part of what we do.
Thanks very much, Emad, and very good to hear that you're supporting your employees in the way you describe, and hopefully other companies are following that example. If I could ask perhaps Raji first, and then Robert the same question about this, because I suspect your experiences may be different. Raji, you have an existing workforce. You're suddenly working in a different way. How do you maintain the connection, the culture, the oversight that we've just been talking about within that context, and what needs to change? Whereas Robert, perhaps with your newer companies, to an extent you may have been able to build those considerations into the design of a company, perhaps. So it will be interesting to hear your different experiences and different take on this issue.
Sure, thank you. I think Emad touched on a very good point on the human capital. We are around 17,000 employees, and we operate in more than 68 countries worldwide. So you can imagine the hassle when suddenly you want everybody to go back home and work from home. What we did is basically from maybe first 2, 3, 4 days, it was a big hassle because people are not used to. Some people do not have laptops to carry home, so they have desktops, and suddenly there is a lockdown, you cannot move. For our good luck is that Aramex has two types of employees who are on the street and delivering shipments. So these people get authorization from day one to go and start delivering. So they used to come to the office, pick the computer, send it back home to the employees so they can use it. Now this also created a huge need to immediate create KPIs for people who didn't have specific KPIs if they are working remotely. And when your employees in the office, you can see that they're delivering and you talk to them every hour, 2 hours maybe. When they are back home, you cannot keep the same type of contact that you used to have face-to-face. So you have to create KPIs for everybody, even though we had lots of KPIs, but we need to create different types of KPIs now. One of the things that popped up also is that if I'm creating a KPI and a deliverable, let's say on Thursday, I don't care if Raji works 8 to 5 or works 5 to 8 in the morning. As far as they deliver their results, then irrespective of the time frame. Now there was a good and a bad thing that came out of this, because as I mentioned, we work in different countries across the globe, and we have employees who physically moved from the suburbs or from the remote villages to the capital where the offices are to work. What happened when we allowed remote work and people were working from home, these people just left their apartments that were leased and they went back home. They have internet access and they can work from home. So this saved a lot of money on them. On the other side, this is a threat in general, not in Aramex only, for, if I'm an engineer, I'm in Amman in Jordan, I know that I might have a way better opportunity to get employed in a company in Amman from somebody who lives 300 kilos far away. Now, because it's online, this engineer who lives 300 kilos far away is becoming a threat for me, because the company might just hire them while they are sitting there and they don't need them to come to the office. So that's another area where I know on my team, for example, 2 of them just moved back to their hometowns and they are working from home. So this is another threat opportunity for employees from the employee side of the business.
Thank you, Raji. I think some of what you described is probably a common experience, I imagine, for many organisations. Robert, as I say, you're in a slightly different position to our other panelists with new companies. To what extent are these sort of issues around developing culture and sort of the necessary oversight easier or more difficult for a new company starting out, particularly in the current climate?
Well, here's a mnemonic for everybody, right? What's the right structure for your culture? And I ask myself that because when you are starting a business, you're creating a certain kind of ethos, a certain kind of culture. You're defining the rules. And so, as Dr. Waddah had alluded to, it's not about the work, it's about the output. So let's take 2 bookends. On the one hand, you have someone that is in the businesses building widgets, and they need to build a certain number of widgets per hour. I don't have to supervise that. I just have to count the widgets. Either they got the widgets done on a per hourly basis or not. It's rather self-evident if they are performing because of the output. Now, in this more modernized, technologically knowledge-intensive economy and world, it's not so much about counting widgets anymore for the more advanced companies. It's about the creativity. And so if I then hold my employees, my peers, my colleagues to the number of hours worked, we all know that sometimes you get that pearl taking a shower, going for a walk. So if I hold them to number of hours worked in a day or a week or month, how do you expect someone who's who's you're hiring to be thoughtful and creative, and then you time bound them by the number of hours they worked, and you have them punch a clock. So it's the people that are sort of in the middle that are sort of on this widget hamster wheel, but are also being tasked to think more creatively. These are the people that are getting frustrated, and they want to go to places where they can truly not have to count their time and count their hours, but be judged by their output. So that's the first. The second is this whole notion of supervisory. If you build the right kind of collaboration amongst your teams, they will self-police and self-reinforce. Because even if you're sitting at home, if I know I've got a colleague who's expecting a deliverable from me, or who's wants to reply, that needs for me to reply to their email, the teams will self-reinforce and self-police. I don't have to supervise anything. I just have to make sure that there's a complementary skill set, and we have some clear objectives. And so the supervisory role is gone, because everyone else will be working towards the output, the objective, and the milestones, et cetera. So I think this is a better way of doing business. And I think the COVID has accelerated the need to think much more in a collaborative fashion as opposed to a command and control fashion.
Thanks, Robert. And that brings us very nicely onto the question we've just had come in from one of our members of the audience. But before I get it, may I just say on a personal level how nice it is to hear someone talking about widgets. When I started out doing this many, many years ago, widgets was always the example we used when talking about anything, and I've missed it over the last few years. So thank you very much for taking on that little trip down memory lane.
My pleasure.
But more seriously, the question that's come in was, what are the new governance frameworks and standards that we might expect to see after the pandemic? And I think there are obviously some of these issues were talked about in the previous panel in terms of improvements to the existing model. But I think what you've just said about a collaborative approach and some of the changes in the nature of organizations that we've already talked about, not just remote working within the company, but increased contracting out and outsourcing and so on, and increased use of, I use the word joint ventures or projects in a broad sense of organizations coming together to collaborate on particular activities rather than any permanent form. It does make you perhaps question whether this idea that all companies are hierarchical structures with the board at the top and the workforce below is not necessarily true anymore. And if it's not true, does our traditional approach to governance and that sort of structure, does that need more of a fundamental rethink, do you think? If you, I know you have some views on this, so if I could start with you and then I'll ask the other panelists to come in. So over to you, Robert.
Oh, sure, great, thank you. So we now live in a platform economy, right? The economic exchange facilitation, the transfer of information, connecting people, making predictions. If you look at the companies that are eating the world, they're all related. They're the Facebooks and the Amazons and the Googles, etc. So in a platform environment, who's the consumer and who's the creator? Who's the owner, right? FinTech, since this is related to the IFC, decentralized finance, who's responsible for the output? And so when you're living in a platform economy, it is very difficult to have a hierarchical structure, because pragmatically it is a challenge to make decisions in real time. And if we remember why corporate governance, as opposed to what I would call collaborative governance or platform governance, traditionally it was around trying to create economies of scale, because it was clear that the corporation was the engine for growth, right? Because as going back to old school, because we were trying to create as many widgets as effectively as we possibly could. But now the product is your attention. The product is not a a fixed asset anymore. It's much more intangible. It's about knowledge and information, data and analysis. So I have no concerns about hierarchy or whatever. It's just, does it work? It doesn't work because the speed of decision making gets caught up when you're trying to top down supervise, get decisions in real time, etc. And since it doesn't work, given the platform nature of the more knowledge intensive nature of the economy, there's now been a blurring between what it is, the value that the company is creating, the engine that it is responsible for, and what the rest of the world is doing as whatever product or service is being created.
Right. I mean, I think that's a very interesting analysis. I suppose my question back to you, but I'll pose it to the other panelists first, is does this model of a collaborative platform-based approach apply to all organizations or just to some? Possibly those that it doesn't apply to ought to be looking to change. But some of the things you've said, in particular, the speed of decision making, seem to me, whatever the nature of your structure or not, whether it's hierarchical or collaborative, must be issues for all boards and all organisations, I think. And again, this is something that must have been highlighted over the last 18 months. So happy to hear from any of the other panelists who wish to go first. But it'd be interesting to get your reaction to Robert's description of the new operating model as he's described it, but also this issue around how you, even if with your existing governance arrangements, can become more responsive, more nimble in the way that you make decisions and take actions. Dr. Waddah, you've unmuted, so do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, just to follow on really from what Robert said, and also the question which came in here, what will be the new governance frameworks and standards after the pandemic? I think over the last few years, we've seen a transformation, at least in the last 20 years, in the governance standards, from being, initially very, very prescriptive, and it always starts that way when you start developing certain standards. I mean, even in engineering standards, in engineering standards, we used to start with very prescriptive kind of standards of how to build walls or build whatever you like, maybe Chris for you, build, make widgets, whatever, so it was very prescriptive, right? So and I think with time, what happened, we started to understand that we can actually get a lot more value out of a system, out of people within the system, out of whatever we're doing by moving towards, as Robert said, look at their creativity and try to get. So what we started doing is saying, okay, look, it doesn't matter. We won't prescribe exactly what you need to do because you're a smart person and you've got some creativity and you can produce things. So we move towards what we call performance-based standards. So performance culture, started coming in. So the standards really for governance really should look at, sort of a performance-based culture. I think what COVID will do and post-pandemic, to maybe attempt to answer that question with regards to new governance frameworks, I think we will eventually move to a principle-based kind of standards. And I think Robert's point about the platform economy, where people are all on the platform and people are sort of communicating, decisions are being made very, very quickly. The decisions are sort of so what the boards will be doing will need to really understand more on the importance of performance with respect to how organizations are adding value to stakeholders and shareholders. But at the same time, what are the principles that they need to set for the leadership team and sort of the employees at large, and say, okay, well, these are the principles now, and what you actually do is you delegate the performance setting to the leaders or the line managers who are closer to the employees, where they sort of come to an agreement that, okay, look, this should be the performance. But at the end of the day, they're advised by the very principles that they of, okay, we want to be a socially effective organization, adding a good more than average profitability every year, right? So I mean, that is, you could say that's performance based. It is, but it's not as prescriptive in terms of the performance standard. So I think we're going to move towards this sort of principle based standard, especially with so much complexity coming into the world today. It's very, very difficult to prescribe something. It's better to prescribe sort of some principles, set of principles, and get organizations to work around them, because there's so many aspects of today's sustainability, risk management. And it's better to get leaders to really understand that. I think the biggest challenge, honestly speaking, is going to be to get boards to make that leap of faith and go through that transformation towards this new governance framework and standard, if you want to use the word standard as well, because I think it's going to go beyond the standard. I think it's going to be more sort of a concept, more sort of concept documents rather than or concept frameworks rather than standards. Yeah, thanks.
So that's an interesting point. Sorry, Raji, were you into that? Did you want to say anything? Somebody, I'm sorry, I thought I heard somebody speak. I thought it might have been Raji, but do you want? I mean, if it was you, Raji, do you want to add anything on to this topic?
Yeah, actually, to start with what Robert said, I like the word platform. So it's not anymore hierarchy. And a platform is usually, you do not manage, in a very standard way. So you can plug in something when it's needed, then unplug it. So the hierarchy, even in the executive team of a company, should be looked at again. And the role of the board and the hierarchy that is there also should be looked at. And Dr. Waddah mentioned stakeholders. I would love to see a representative of each stakeholder group in the board. So you would see an NGO sitting on the board from the local community that is impacted by the company's operation. So it's not just investors and finance people who are sitting on the board looking at the interest of the shareholders mainly, and then they look at the stakeholders if there's a necessity. And if we are looking at UAE now, it's becoming compulsory for all public shareholding companies to start reporting on sustainability. So if the board is not aware of this as part of the performance of the company, then it will be left down. So if the investors later on come in and look at this company and they are not doing very well in sustainability, that is a requirement of the stock market, then there is a huge risk there. So the role of the board should be looked at. Lots of boards have audit committees, risk committees, but I think maybe adding other committees or overlapping committees with each other when they look at the ESG part of the business, and I'm sure the previous board looked at that in very details. But I think the governance and the structure of the board should be looked at to match the fast changes that are happening across the globe right now. And if I want to get BlackRock to invest in the stock market in the Middle East, the stock market better be up to that level of requirement that they are looking at now in terms of ESG. So the board needs to be very aware of the changes and change even the role of the board as they look at the business, the corporate and other.
Thanks, Raji. I mean, that's a very interesting observations, and as you say, it picks up some of the comments that were made in the earlier panel about not just the points that Robert and Dr. Whatever made, but have you got the right people around the board table, assuming you still have a board, to address the challenges and the opportunities that the company faces. Emad, we've moved into the Q&A session, but this is in response to a question, so I think we've got that. There was one other that I must go back to, which we missed earlier. But do you have any observations on whether
just a quick yes, a quick feedback on what Robert has said, and also Dr. Waddah and Raji mentioned. Yes, of course, we also big corporations are moving to be. We are getting more agile, and certain type of decisions, of course, are taking taken much more faster compared to the past. But what is important here, that the more and more you are becoming agile, your people need to be accountant to the decision which they are taking. So in a small setup, in a startup environment, that's easy if you are 20, 30 people or less. But in a big corporation, you need to take your people with you. Again, that's a change management that's required in order that people are really accountant of the decisions they're making on day in, day out. Thank you.
No, that's true. And obviously the challenges for a larger organization are often very different to those for small ones, as you say, I think we'll draw this bit of the conversation to the conclusion, and I'll ask a question. One quick observation on this. A number of you have talked about whether it's sort of moving away from a hierarchical position entirely or to delegating downwards to the appropriate point of the organisation, the decision making, which I entirely agree. It seems sensible. I think just one thing to note, and this was mentioned on the previous panel, is that that's not really the direction of where regulators have been going over the last few years. More and more direct responsibilities in different jurisdictions have been placed on the board and on individual directors in terms of their legal responsibilities, their legal liabilities, and so on. So I think there's if we're going to rethink the nature of governance within individual organisations, we probably need to rethink the regulation of governance as well, because those tensions are pulling in opposite directions at the moment. But the question that was asked some time ago, and we promised we'd come back to in relation to supply chains, it was addressed particularly to Dr. Waddah, but I think all of you are able to answer this, which is, what do you think are the looking forward? We're all familiar with what the specific issues have been during the pandemic with supply chains. What do you think ongoing the nature of the biggest challenge is going to be, and how should companies that have extensive supply chains, perhaps global supply chains, should be aiming to sort of preempt or prevent some of those challenges? Dr. Waddah, it was addressed to you in the first instance, so if you want to start, but
yeah,
who else can join in?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we learned in the supply chain is, and I think what has been mentioned, I mean, the key word is collaboration. And I think the understanding, and I think many of the organizations that I've spoken to, and the heads of organizations I've spoken to in the last 16 months have said that, you know, they survived in terms of their supply chain because of the collaborative nature that they've had. If they were manufacturing, or if it was the food supply chain, or if it was sort of within the energy supply chain and stuff like that. Because I think at the time, many leaders engaged in what we would call in leadership style sense making and situational leadership, and they realized that, you know, the only way to perform better is to leverage on the supply chain. But now, moving out of the pandemic, I think there's going to be more focus on optimization, operational excellence, and looking at your supply chain, and looking at not only resilience in depth and business continuity, but also looking at the current, for example, contracts that you have, your ability to move and able to source your product, and dealing with enterprise risk management in terms of concentration risk and things like that. So it is quite a big topic, really, Chris. It's a good question. It's very difficult to answer very succinctly or in a few words, but all these things need to be considered. Yeah, thanks.
So hopefully you've made several attempts to answer it very well, despite the difficulty of doing so much time we have available. Does anybody else want to add anything to what Dr. Waddah said on that question? If not, we'll turn to our closing question. I'll take that as a no. In that case, as nobody's unmuting themselves. The final question we've come in, which I almost think somebody's reading my notes, because this is the question I was going to ask you all anyway, is to ask each of you in turn, and happy to take it in whichever order you want, of all the things that you have learned in terms of your organisation, or in Robert's case, in terms of setting up a new organisation over the last few years, but perhaps particularly during the last 18 months, are there one or two lessons or recommendations that you would like to make to other organisations, other companies represented in the audience, to say either these are things that worked for us in terms of dealing with the challenges we faced, or these are issues that you at the very least ought to be discussing around the board table? I'll need, in the interest of time, to keep you to a couple of quick comments each. Raji, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Actually, the most important thing we noticed during the past 16 months is that, and this is what we are doing for our 38 years now, is being agile is the most important aspect of business. Don't be the elephant. The minute you become, even if you are a 1 million employees company, you need to be very agile. Your business processes need to be extremely aligned in a way that you can shift them 360 degrees or 180 degrees without even impacting your business. So always have a backup to and I remember there was one factory in Japan, and they released a product, and the minute they released that product, they asked the engineers, how are we going to kill this one so we can come up with another one. So always be agile in your business processes to make sure that you cater for anything, and you don't want just the pandemic to drive us to change our business models, because pandemic will end up later on, but the changes that are happening across the globe are way beyond the pandemic itself.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent piece of advice. Maybe you can be proactive, not reactive, and you can't anticipate everything, but you'll be better able to respond to them if you've made those sort of plans. That's excellent. Who would like to go next? Robert, would you care to go next? Are you ready? Or Emad, sorry, Emad has. No,
I can go next. I think also on top of Raji, as mentioned, be ready with an emergency plan. What's very important that get connected with your team, because without the team effort, without your, let's say, your colleagues and your employees, you won't be able to make it happen in terms of emergency. So the human connections within your organization is absolutely crucial to make it happen, because without being one team united, that would be very difficult to face such a pandemic.
Thank you. And again, rather, Raji was saying that's not something that you can start doing when the problems hit. That's something you need to put a lot of investment in, time into on an ongoing basis. Robert, to yourself.
The biggest challenge I'm having, because I spent a lot of my time in actually Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where I moved there in 2003, and one of the businesses we formed was to try to exploit the challenges with the supply chain. So we're sourcing agricultural products out of Africa, processing them, creating brands around them, and then distributing them globally, just to give you a context. And the biggest challenge that I'm experiencing is, I guess the best way to call it is psychological safety. Because as we've got people in the US and Americans, I'm an American, of course, we have a certain approach to things. I practice something called radical transparency. I'm going to be very clear what I'm seeing as I'm seeing it. And I usually don't put a lot of sugar on top of it, because the sugar sort of obstructs the message and what the solution is going to be. But with my colleagues in Asia or with my colleagues in the Middle East, there's different notions of psychological safety. We call it culture. And so the challenge when trying to deal with different cultures and make sure that everyone has the psychological safety, why is that important? Because I want people to say when they don't know something, or what their bias is, or where they are uncomfortable making a decision. Or I have an idea, can I trust that my colleagues will not make me feel goofy or stupid or silly if I come up with something that may or may not make sense? And so the biggest challenge I have, which I think is a challenge that large companies have as well, just magnified by a couple of zeros, right, is this notion of psychological safety, particularly in times of stress and working from home and fast-moving environments, et cetera. Is how do you give your employees the space to give their best, knowing that things are moving quickly and knowing that they have room and opportunity to experiment without serious repercussions and to be wrong without serious repercussions.
Thanks, Robert. And I think there's two quick points before turning to Dr. Waddah for the final word. Is I think what you call the psychological safety sort of builds on what Emad was saying about the need to create a working environment where people feel supported, people feel able to give of their best part of the team and so on. So I think that's a useful reinforcing point. I mean, more generally, your point about cultural differences, we'll call it that, between different is a big issue, I'm sure, for all global or multinational organizations, or even those that just have multinational supply chains, and it's something that's easily overlooked to assume that the way we do things here is the way everyone else does them, and building that into your way of working must be important too. Very quickly, Dr. Waddah, if you may, I guess there's a couple of quick final observations from yourself, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, just three quick things. One of them is, maybe advice to boards that one, let's not put all our eggs in one basket. We saw demand destruction, for example. If you look at energy and oil and gas, there was massive demand destruction that we've never seen, we never imagined. So I think in terms of looking at our whole supply chain, we need to make sure that whatever we do, we don't put all eggs in one basket. We do that by implementing properly enterprise risk management and really relooking at the way that we balance better the risk versus the reward, and not run after the reward and say, yes, we've got the risks covered. No, actually, when we're looking at reward now, look at the risks which are there, sitting very, very clearly within the reward. And finally, because I know my colleagues have said this, but I cannot emphasize it enough. People are at the center of this, so it's very important that we understand the human element, the human factors, and moving forward, I think the organizations that are going to be most successful are those that are going to take care of their people. I mean, the human capital and the human energy is ultimately the most important thing. That's why we build these systems and we create value, because we're humans on Earth, so we shouldn't forget that, and we should not forget obviously the greater environment as well, and our commitment towards sustainability as boards. And I'd like to end with that. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all our panel. I've been told I have 30 seconds to sum up. It seems to me completely churlish and foolish to believe I could possibly do justice to everything you've said in 30 seconds. So I'm not going to attempt to. And I think the four of you between you have brought out the main messages from this session much more clearly than I could. So thank you very much to all our excellent panel. I would happily have spent much longer talking to you all, but we must bow to the needs of the conference. So thank you again for your time and your insights, and I'm sure everybody found those invaluable. I'll now hand over to Dr. Ashraf just to say a few closing words before the first day of the conference comes to an end. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, I'm waiting for you. Tom, give me the sign. Well, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for the excellent panelists, actually. I mean, I've learned a lot from this panel, and one thing I love about it is it's very practical. It is really, this is practitioner stuff. It's not really some sort of a researcher or hypothesis. This is really what are the challenges, and these are the insights we got from you. So thank you so much for this excellent session. I'd like to end the day by thanking the participants, those who are with us until now. We had an excellent day today, and please join us tomorrow as well. Tomorrow, the focus will be on ESG and investment and the board of directors. So tomorrow, talk about the role of the boards in ESG, and then ESG and investments as well. So tomorrow, again, we have another excellent set of panelists who will be participating with us. So we'll see you tomorrow, and we are happy to hear your comments and your feedback. Send us emails or messages. And please do visit our sponsors' booths. They have, again, you can contact them. They have more information to give you about governance, about different issues, and also about things that they can do for you. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Thank you.